This is Ryan Hillier reporting for the NB Media Co-op from the Kinsella Auditorium at St. Thomas University in Fredericton. Tonight, the auditorium hosted a talk by public intellectual Tariq Ali, who spoke about the frailties of Western civilization.
The reason I chose this particular subject is, I think, obvious, which is that for one whole year we have been witnessing what virtually all the human rights organizations, including from within the United Nations, including Amnesty International, and many others, have characterized as a genocide. Do not be frightened away by politicians or any others telling you not to think what you want to think. The freedom to think, the freedom to make up your own minds, the freedom to read books that they want you to stop reading, the freedom to say what you want to say without being accused of anti-Semitism, which is grotesque in 99% of the cases. Just to stop people thinking. Don't ever accept that, because your future and the future of your children depends on your generation and the generations to follow. And you have to fight back.
We'll go to that uncut talk in a moment, but first, some reaction from some of the attendees.
My name is Chantal, and as a Palestinian, I thought it was very refreshing to come into a room, into a lecture, where it is just openly said it's a genocide. This is something that should not be happening. We are all sitting watching it from our cell phones every night, and it's been happening for so long, not just the past year, but for the past 80 years. So I just thought everything he said gave me shivers, and I wish that more politicians and administration and people in higher levels in the institutions that are governing us could have been here. So hopefully any recordings do get out to them.
And did you have any takeaways about what we can do locally to address some of the issues that were brought up?
The last year has been very hopeless, I think. I think it's been very depressing, and it's been very hard seeing this happening. The message I took away with it was to have hope and to fight back and to continue resisting and not to allow these systems to overpower us. So I think that it just needed to be said. It needed to be validated again, because it's been a hard year, 80 years.
My name's Amber. I came here very curious to hear what Tariq Ali had to say. Very impressed that we got a talk like this at all at a university in New Brunswick or in Canada. Very interesting perspectives that were critical of the way that I think Western civilization sees itself and is maybe not seeing itself honestly in the current political moment, with some very interesting, thought-provoking perspectives. Also, in particular, really necessary perspectives on how the genocide in Gaza is and isn't being discussed openly and honestly in both the US and Canada and Europe. So I'm very thankful that we got this talk.
Did you have any takeaways about actions that people can take locally to address some of the issues that were raised?
Locally is tough because it was a very international politics focused conversation. So I think that maybe the subtext was there about what to do locally. I think a lot of the conversation focused on just being honest with ourselves about the political moment, not underestimating or overestimating the situation that we're finding ourselves in, given the actions by the US and some of the threats that we're hearing, and having honest conversations with ourselves about the potential implications and what that actually means and what we should expect from one another, given some of the actions that we've maybe sanctioned in other parts of the world that we don't think that we would deserve.
My name is Liam MacDougall. I'm a first-year student here at St. Thomas. So it was a very eye-opening experience, but it also ended off with a message of hope. It wasn't, the title sounds very daunting and, very scary, but the final message really was a message of hope, in that there is, the next generation can have an impact on change.
And do you have any takeaways about what we can do locally to address some of the things that Ali discussed?
A big topic throughout the whole lecture was injustices, and specifically the war in Gaza. And I think at a local level, it's just about community coming together and having their priorities put forward. Whether that's through peaceful assembly or that's through citizens groups. There's even in the Western world, there are things we can do collectively and demand what our social justice agendas are.
My name is Najer Sarabia. Came from Miramichi, and I think this is a great opportunity for younger generation to learn a little bit about the history and to get to meet such an important person like Ali.
Yeah, and do you think there's any local actions that people can take to kind of address some of the things that he spoke about? Things that we could do in New Brunswick?
A call to people to visit their MP, their MLA, to issue a public statement that they are against the atrocities that the Zionists are committing right now not just in Gaza, but again in Lebanon and as well in the West Bank. And another way to get involved is join local organizations who are already protesting, signing petitions, sending letters to politicians. So this is a good way to get involved. And another way to get involved is just share the message. Bring the message to your community, to a school, to your church, to work, and try to talk to your family members about the importance to be against this genocide. And again, everywhere you go, you have a responsibility to bring this message out and come up to the right side of history.
I'm Stephanie Kavanaugh. It was a fantastic talk. I was really heartened to see so many people come and see this, to see students engaged, people from university communities and members of just the public in general. And I really I'm a historian, so speaking as a historian, to see current events and really important political questions set in historical context, it was really powerful.
As we gathered on the traditional and unceded territory of the Wolastoqiyik, it is my privilege to introduce this evening's guest, Tariq Ali, a world-renowned public intellectual and distinguished writer. Born on October 21st, 1943, in Lahore, Punjab, then British India, now Pakistan, Mr. Ali went on to graduate from Oxford University, having studied philosophy, politics, and economics at Exeter College. He has led a diverse career as a historian, political activist, commentator, filmmaker, novelist, and playwright. Known for his anti-imperialist stance, he has championed on a range of issues, from Vietnam to Iraq. Mr. Ali has been a leading voice in anti-war movements and continues to be a prominent figure. Throughout his life, he has championed oppressed and marginalized peoples. His main focus today is his well-argued yet vigorous opposition to British and Western colonialism, US imperialism, and its analogues. He currently resides in London. As a political commentator, Mr. Ali has garnered a global readership with over 50 influential books, including Pirates of the Caribbean, Bush in Babylon, The Clash of Fundamentalisms, The Obama Syndrome, Can Pakistan Survive, and provocative critique of Winston Churchill's life, Winston Churchill, His Times, His Crimes. He also has written several novels as part of his Islam Quintet series and created scripts for both stage and screen. A long-standing editor of New Left Review, Mr. Ali has maintained a prominent presence in the international left since the 1960s. He has contributed regularly to the Guardian newspaper since 1970s. He debated many, including Christopher Hitchens and Henry Kissinger, and interviewed many, including Edward Said and John Lennon. Mr. Ali's first memoir, Street Fighting Years, an autobiography of the 60s, 1987, was followed by his most recent book, 2024, You Can't Please All. A rich collection of analysis, anecdotes, memories that offer insights into his life and that of his comrades and friends. The book is structured in a way that allows you to open any section and dive right into. It covers a wide range of topics, from cricket to his visit to North Korea, and even includes an essay opposing the British royal family. As one reviewer of the memoir notes, the book is a great read. It is like being invited to dinner with him, and who would turn down such an invitation? Mr. Ali is also the inspiration for the Rolling Stones song Street Fighting Man. Mick Jagger, who often participated in anti-war demonstrations, gave Mr. Ali a handwritten version of the lyrics, knowing the BBC wouldn't play it, and asked him to publish it in the Black Dwarf, a political and cultural newspaper published in the UK. The song appeared on the cover of an issue ahead of a major Vietnam War demonstration with an article titled Engels and Jagger on Street Fighting. The song became, as we all know, a part of political folklore. So, Street Fighting Man, welcome to Canada, welcome to Fredericton, and welcome to St. Thomas. Now I give you Tariq Ali.
Good evening. Thank you very much for inviting me to Canada in winter again. And I'm very pleased to be here. I think all the times I've visited this country since the early 70s, most of my trips have been in the winter for some reason. They don't want me to see Canada in the summer. I'll be too shocked. The reason I chose this particular subject is, I think, obvious. And I will return to that later in my talk, which is that for one whole year, we have been witnessing what virtually all the human rights organizations, including from within the United Nations, including Amnesty International, and many others, have characterized as a genocide. And this itself has caused a debate and a furor, and with some defenders of Israel, instead of being good friends to Israel and saying enough is enough, that's what a good friend should do, saying don't act in a way which could lead to your own destruction, if not now, in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time. Instead of saying that, they've been backing them uncritically. And why this world we live in is becoming fragile, and I mean the Western world, is when states, democratic states with elected governments, try and stop people, young people in particular, saying what they want to say about a particular crisis. This has never happened before. Never happened during the Vietnam War, when some of you will remember huge activities against that war in the United States itself. In 71, the big march outside the Pentagon, in which most of the people who participated in that march were GIs, wearing their uniforms. Some of the GIs without arms, crippled, without legs, all with their medals, emblazoned on their chests, marched in front of the Pentagon and demanded that the war be brought to an end, and demanded and stressed that the Vietnamese were going to win that war. Of course, the people opposed them. They were attacked, but no one ever said, you can't say that because it's anti-American. Like what is being said today about some of those protesting what is going on in the Middle East. Let me start with the following quote. I think it was in 1936 or 37, that an US journalist from Life magazine, who was a photographer as well, visited India and got an interview with Mahatma Gandhi, the nationalist leader of the Indian people. And the first question she asked him was, "What do you think of Western civilization?" And Gandhi replied in a very soft voice, "It would be a good idea." And I've never forgotten that. I read it ages and ages ago. And it made me smile because Gandhi was not someone who had a great sense of humor. I mean, he could be witty. But this was, I thought, a classic remark. Now, what I want to say to you, that civilizations and what they are and who they are and how they define themselves and how they're characterized by others are usually, relatively speaking, short-lived affairs. We know ancient times, the existence of Greek civilization, the existence of Roman civilization, and what they left to the world in terms of art, in terms of culture, in terms of poetry, in many other ways. But then we had a period not much talked about in the history books. And that was, I would argue, from the 9th to the 11th centuries, the domination in the Western world, not the Eastern world, the domination in the Western world of Islamic civilization, which ruled and governed and worked with in Spain and Portugal, parts of Italy, tiny parts of France, from these centuries. And it's worth stressing today that one of the periods in Jewish history where they were the least prosecuted and persecuted, was in in the Iberian Peninsula, Spain, Portugal, under Arab rule. And they have written about it. Christianity, Judaism, and Islam flourished together. The ruling class of that world, the European world of Islam, was an Islamic ruling class, an Arab, to be more precise, a ruling class. And they debated, they discussed, they argued with each other. And apart from when the Catholic war against the Muslims began, and the Jews were expelled from Spain and Portugal in 1492. The Muslims were expelled from Spain in 1526. The choice they were given was either you convert to Christianity, or you die, or you leave the country where we are living now. And even the King of Spain later on said, how could they be asked to leave? They were Spaniards like us, after all. But they were asked to leave. And many died. This is a history that has not often and rarely now been taught in the histories of the Western world. And yet it's a history that goes very deep in mathematics, in algebra, in astronomy, in medicine. All these disciplines were moved forward during the years, decades, centuries of Islamic civilization. And we wouldn't have many of the Greek texts today that we do extant if they had not been translated from ancient Greek into Arabic. Many of them disappeared afterwards. And so that civilization played its part in creating the synthesis that became Western civilization till the advent of the Industrial Revolution. Now, the thing I want to sort of stress is that the early ideologues of what was international law, since international law plays a big part in forming a civilization for good or for bad, that in these cases, most of the ideologues, historians, and philosophers, not all, but most, justified the rule, their conquests, the colonial offensive they waged, by claiming that they were a superior civilization. And they argued the point. And they were quite open about it. I mean, the Spanish philosopher Francisco de Vitoria justified the conquest of South America not in terms of the Pope or God's laws or religion. He said no. Very interesting to read what he wrote at the time, which I did before preparing for this talk. He said the native peoples of South America had violated the law of communication. What was the law of communication? The freedom to travel freely across the continent and the freedom to trade, i.e., all the things that the natives people were stopping the Spanish conquerors from doing in their continent, taking it over, imposing through force their right to trade, their right to kill, their right to occupy. This was described as the law of communication. I mean, you know, one could use that same argument and say people today who get so worked up about migrants traveling all over the world, seeking jobs in places where they think they can find them, that law of communication is being violated by every single government in the West in one way or another. And most recently by Donald Trump's decision to deport, let's hope it is a token, of migrants from South America back to the places from where they came. Very dangerous development. And, you know, the people being expelled could very much use the law of communication, saying he's stopping our right to trade and travel. But that was the argument used to defend the entire conquest of South America by the Spanish. The Puritans who took the north of America were more, the arguments they used tended more towards religion and the use of Protestantism, though some of the more sharper ones used other language, like, well, the economic language, saying you're interfering with us doing what we want to do. Walter Grotius, who's the great Dutch theorist, used very similar language. And he started off by defending the right of piracy, pirating on the sea, because his cousin, this is all, he described it very ably himself. This is all because a ship his cousin, armed ship his cousin was using to attack other ships, had attacked a Portuguese ship and stolen from that Portuguese ship 3 million Dutch guilders, the equivalent of 3 million Dutch guilders, a figure then comparable to the total annual revenue of England, which caused a sensation in Europe. Grotius explained that the high seas should be regarded as a free zone for both states and armed private companies. Just open. And if we are stronger, the armed private companies are stronger than the state, then they must be allowed to have their way. This is something, incidentally, that can be noticed today in most parts of the Western world. How private companies, the tech billionaires are just one example, but how private companies are being given more and more leeway in determining government policies, and how, as a result, politics itself is getting hollowed out, and democracy likewise. Since money controls everything, the last figures I got, I can't recall them now, but both from the States and from Britain, is that the alienation of people between the ages of 16 and 30 with the political system and how it functions is increasing. Many, many people don't vote because they say it changes nothing. And on that front, one has to say that they are right. I mean, if you look at the set of politicians competing with each other to make money, what's the big difference? And that is what they're doing. I once asked an old school friend of mine, who later became a big politician and businessman in Pakistan. I said, why did you have to do both? Why did you become a wealthy businessman and go into politics? He said, I thought it was best to become a wealthy businessman and a politician, so I wouldn't have to bribe myself. And this degree of cynicism exists. Grotius, the defender of Dutch colonialism, of Dutch brutalities on the ocean, etc., then wrote, "The right of the sword is the right to award punishment," and I quote, "Kings and those who are invested with a power equal to kings have a right to exact punishments, not only for injuries committed against themselves or their subjects, but likewise for those which do not peculiarly concern them, but are in any persons whatsoever grievous violations of the law of nature or nations." In other words, what Grotius was offering was license to attack, conquer, and kill whosoever stood in the way of European colonial expansion. And that is how it was done. So every move to explain civilization is linked to colonialism, to expansionism, to the right to do whatever they want to do to native peoples. This has happened, and it's happened because a tiny part of the tiniest continent compared to the others, Europe, got the Industrial Revolution going, got technology going, began to develop weapons which no one else could compete with. So within the European world, France, Britain first, France, Germany, Italy, Portugal, Spain, conquered the rest of the world. That is what they did. At the same time, in another part of the world, there were other civilizations, and if you read their philosophers, even going back to the years before the Christian era, you will read some astonishing texts by Chinese philosophers, Chinese bureaucrats, Chinese political scientists before the Christian era, saying that we should try and create societies in which all are benefited, not equally, they didn't raise the question of equality, but in which the entire population is looked after and their needs fulfilled. Each of them is taught to write, and this decision to make China literate, which goes back at over 2,000 years now, is what helps to explain the continuing hold that the civilization of that part of the world holds in China itself. And I don't have time to do it on China, but it is quite astonishing what was written in books, in essays, in the saying of sages, the early attacks on Confucius for being too conservative, the fights with the monarchy, and some even raising the question of why do we need a monarchy in the 4th century, in the 5th century. So that civilization, whatever, and it had shortcomings like any other civilization did, actually was a more thoughtful one in many ways compared to the civilizations which effectively wanted to take the rest of the world. The Chinese regarded China as the world. That's what they called it in early texts, the world. They referred to China as the world. And this continuity of language, of systems of thought, of literacy, have remained and created now a country that is challenging the world. I mean, any of you who've been to China recently, you compare the social infrastructure of that country with that of North America. I mean, North America abandoned trains 100 years ago. The Chinese are rebuilding a train system which compares to nothing else on earth. And they're doing it in a way where these trains are affordable for everyone, not just the wealthy or the rich. And that automatically means that because the public transport system is so good, your reliance on the motor car becomes less, which is good for everyone, especially including ecology. And so we have this strange contrast between two civilizations. Western civilization created largely in the period, of course created before as well, as I pointed out, but created in its modern form after the Industrial Revolution and the growth of technology. Now, the question for me is not whether America, the United States is in inexorable decline. It isn't. It's a decline that, it has been partially in decline, but not to the extent that people who engage in wishful thinking would like it to be. Because let's take one example. The invention of the web, the internet, came from the West Coast. It didn't come from China, it didn't come from India. It came from the West Coast. And there are reasons for that as well. And that one invention transformed the world, transformed the United States, transformed all the generations who have grown up after it in a good way. It has bad sides too, which invention doesn't? But in the sense of being able to communicate with each other. I remember an Iraqi poet telling me the day Bush Jr. was bombing Baghdad and sending the American troops had gone in to capture Iraq. And I was having a meal with this Iraqi historian. And he had written a very powerful and strong poem. And he said to me, "Ani Tariq, this poem I have written in the old days, I might have read it out on the telephone to my friend Muzaffar al-Nawab, another great poet in exile in Damascus at the time. And we would have laughed and joked, he would have criticized, I would have defended. But now this is a poem I've written today. And already it's being recited in the cafes in Basra because of this bloody internet." He said, that could never have happened before. And this small example explains what this invention has done. By and large, in my opinion, and of course, it can be and will be misused by the tech billionaires and others, but they can't completely destroy it now or control it. That's the nice side of it. There are too many people from this generation and the generation before it who know how it functions and who can deal with it. We wouldn't have got much of the news that we have got, not from the mainstream media networks, but from individuals during the Gaza war, which has compelled some of the mainstream, shamed them to take up what is going on there. And that's what I want to talk about now. Because for me, the biggest breakdown in Western civilization, since one segment of that civilization, the German segment of it, carried out the Judeo-side of the Second World War. Since then, and everyone thought the world had learned its lessons, but no. Millions died in Vietnam. At least 2 million people were killed by the US in Iraq, 5 million orphans, 40 or 50,000 in Libya. We haven't got the total figures yet for the Syrian civil war, which has been going on from 2011 and has recently been ended by yet another expansion and the taking over of an Arab country. Those figures will come in yet. But most strikingly, what has shocked people, including myself, and including many, many Jewish people who do not consider themselves Zionists, leave alone supporters of the most extreme wing of Zionism led by Netanyahu. And they are angry. And one of the most moving things for me was to see the Jewish students, young Jewish students in New York, occupying Grand Central Station, saying, leave it to us, this is our duty, and raising the question of what was going on in Israel. Many, many of my Jewish friends who've been friends for, I was going to say centuries, are against this war. And yet the way it's being portrayed is completely different, as a fight between Jews and non-Jews, not a fight between what has been done to the Palestinians. And we're now in a shameful situation that people in the West who have watched this genocide taking place day after day after day, who have watched Israeli soldiers of the IDF gleefully killing and targeting children. A doctor says, why is this poor kid, aged 2, got 6 bullets in the head? And someone replies to him, oh, no reason in particular, just to make sure, I guess. This is going on. And yet the world walks by, not the whole world. Many people protest. The whole world doesn't walk by because the whole world notices. I mean, in the South mainly, there have been big, huge demonstrations taking place, and in the United States, and in Britain. Huge demonstrations. Now they want to stop the demonstrations. They want to deport the students taking place in them. Where are they going to deport the Americans who've been taking part in these demonstrations? Now, most of them are not sort of Arab origin. Where are they going to be sent back to Europe? It's a long time. So it's a very strange world we live in, and I will be honest with you. I fear for this world. Because if people can watch what is the Gazans in particular, but now also in the West Bank, have been suffering for over a year, what if this carries on? What if the war in Gaza, Netanyahu needs an excuse to renew it, he does renew it, and they kill more people and they take Gaza? The logic of that is for a section of the American empire to say, well, they got away with it. And if they can get away with it, we can get away with it. So when Trump first raised the question of taking Greenland and Canada, people laughed. And I said, hang on a minute, don't laugh too quickly. Greenland, there's already a US base there, and they treat it as their own. And who are the Danes going to stand up to them? An irony of ironies. The Danish are probably, after the British, the most slavish vassals of the United States. Went to Afghanistan to fight with them, went to Iraq to fight with them, praised them, support. Now they're suddenly surprised that they can be treated in the way in which the West was treating the Arab world and the African world. It can be done to them, but not to us. Well, the question has to be asked if you support it or remain passive when it was being done to other parts of the world. Why be too upset when the big chief of the American empire says he's going to do it to you? If he can take over and break Iraq into pieces, if they can do the same to Palestine at the present moment, if they can threaten other parts of the Middle East, why shouldn't they threaten parts of Europe which they feel are in their interest, like taking over Greenland, which they will? I had an exchange with a very old songwriter, socialist songwriter friend of mine in Toronto, Frank Rooney. I said, Frank, just to show your government how foolish it is, to put it at its mildest, I'm thinking of giving critical support to the American takeover of your country. I was joking, of course, but it's Trump. I mean, looked at from the point of view of the United States, Canada's no different. I mean, they're like us. They pretend they're different, but they aren't. And they do more or less as we do. And they do as we say. I mean, this didn't happen in Trudeau Sr.'s time. It certainly is happening now. And so why don't we take them over? They have a problem that most Canadians, I'm assuming, won't want it, apart from the Albertans. But you can't blame the United States for thinking like that, if they think about that, other parts of the world, why should they completely not do that with the white world? That's what it boils down to. And that, so my friend Frank wrote, and he said, I knew you were joking, but no one here is going to support an Anschluss. That was the forced merger of Germany and Austria by Hitler. And I said no. But would there be a resistance? Because no one's going to resist the United States militarily. Let's take it seriously for a minute. What would happen if Trump said, I want Canada? The first thing he'd do, of course, is discuss with the rich people in this country. So Alberta is not totally irrelevant in this regard, but others too. Get them on his side, use his own tech billionaires to say, tech billionaires of the world, unite. And then some would resist. Even a weak and supine Canadian political leadership would at the very least, one hopes, insist on a referendum. And the conditions, if they are going to cave in, I'm not saying they are, but I do want to discuss it, one shouldn't avoid it, to be prepared. That if they are going to say, well, come hell or high water, we're going to take Canada, that the Canadians could, of course, lay down conditions, saying, if you're going to force us to, we can't have a civil war with you. We might go that way, though I hope no one says that, but you and I know there are people who will. And then lay down conditions, saying, even if you force us to do this, the law and rule of the Canadian state in relation to individuals carrying weapons, we will not allow that to be changed. We will not allow a relatively free health service to be changed. These are gains for our people. And in fact, a more audacious Canadian leadership, or a Quebecois and Canadian leadership, could say, we can encourage other US states who would like to have our model of health and gun laws to actually, why not join Canada? We could create another group of states in this part of the world. I'm saying all this to you because the world we live in, it is, I think it's unlikely, but it could happen. So you should absolutely think of it. And to conclude, I would just like to say to all of you, but especially the younger generations, do not be frightened away by politicians or any others telling you not to think what you want to think. The freedom to think, the freedom to make up your own minds, the freedom to read books that they want you to stop reading, the freedom to say what you want to say without being accused of anti-Semitism, which is grotesque in 99% of the cases. Just to stop people thinking. Don't ever accept that, because your future and the future of your children depends on your generation and the generations to follow. And you have to fight back. Fight back. Defend all your rights the way they should be defended. And understand that if done collectively, it is more powerful than if it's done by one person. You know, we fall into the trap and the habit of idealizing people who do good things, which is fine. It's not enough. Because this single concentration on a single person is actually deeply unhealthy. And so collective, collegial ways of thinking creates a solidarity which is absolutely necessary if our world is going to move forward rather than permit the politicians and their military-industrial complexes to wipe us out. Thank you.
In keeping with Stu's commitment to critical thinking, respectful discussion, and inclusive dialogue, we will open up to questions from the floor. I'm Dr. Shannon Brooke-Murphy. I am the director of the Atlantic Human Rights Center, and I will be moderating this discussion, likely. Okay. But before we start, I kindly ask our audience members, whether faculty or students or broader community members, to please formulate your contributions in the form of a question and keep it brief to allow the maximum number of people to participate in the short time we have available. We do want to leave time for the reception and the book signing, and the house is packed, and I imagine there are quite a few of you who want to ask questions, so please, question form, keep it brief, and then give way to the person behind you. As always, with every event, I would remind you to please keep the tone of your remarks respectful of others. Please don't engage in long diatribes or abusive or discriminatory language of any sort. So now, I invite you please to line up at the two aisle microphones, here and here, and when I prompt you, please identify yourself and proceed. We'll take your questions, I think, in alternation from each mic, and this will allow Mr. Ali the opportunity to respond. And I should mention that this event is being recorded. Okay, help yourselves. Students of mine, if nobody else.
Hello, my name is Kevin Matthews. I'm wondering what your thoughts are about this desire to occupy Mars.
About?
This desire to occupy Mars.
I didn't get...
Inhabit Mars.
My hearing is bad. I have to apologize to you.
He wonders about this desire to occupy Mars. Can you attribute that quote?
No, I understand. I don't know who wants to really occupy Mars. I mean, I'd be very happy if the tech billionaires went and lived there.
And thank you to that speaker. You were a model of brevity. And we'll now take somebody from this mic over here.
Hello, my name is Jeffrey Bork. I am an alumnus of St. Thomas University. My question is, what is the role of art, fiction writing, playwriting, that sort of thing, any kind of art, in social struggle? Thank you.
I don't think so. I've never found it to be. I mean, I think all of us, I really mean that, have the capacity to think about different things at different times. That's why I personally have been, I don't think, in my arguments with people who just think about identity politics, I always argue that there are more things to each individual than identity politics, which is important, of course, I wouldn't deny that. But people don't simply think in those terms, and I'll explain it to you by a little story. When I was a student in Oxford, Malcolm X came to visit and speak at the Oxford Union. And because Malcolm had become a Muslim, they introduced him to me. I was, used to speak and was an activist. And he hugged me and said, Tariq Ali, Muslim brother. I said, I am your brother. But I just want you to know, so there's no misunderstanding, that I'm an atheist. And he burst out laughing and said, I've just come back from the Arab world. And the number of people who said things like that to me, I can't even count them, they're numerous. I said, exactly. That's all I'm trying to say. And he made one of the best speeches of his life about 3-4 months before he was killed, calling on black and white people to join the struggle together, to fight together, he spoke up in favor of mixed marriages, etc., etc., etc. I am, believe that you can do lots more things than we are given to do. And at the time, what's one more thing, because it's an important question, I feel, that when for the first time ever, mainly after the Second World War, working class kids, men and women, were given a chance to go to university, what did they do? They didn't just talk about what it's been like being a member of a working class family. Most people from that class know that. They wrote plays, they became poets, they painted, and then their reviewers, snotty noses, some of them were, would say, "Oh God, he's done this. He's from the working class," as if it was a big deal. So the question is whether people are given the space and the time to do that or not. And my advice is, even if you're not given the time, do it.
Thank you. I'll invite this person to this mic.
Hi, my name is Catherine Elzardo. I'm just asking on behalf of my students in the philosophy class, where we primarily focus on Edward Said's work. Today we reviewed Edward Said's 1998 lecture, Myths of the Clash of Civilizations, and after reflecting on your lecture title, The Frailties of the Western Civilization, we collectively came up with just like 2 questions. We were inspired by Said's notions of coexistence. Can this concept replace the idea of civilization, which is in any case doomed to be frail? And the second one is, what systemic changes do we as human societies need to make, particularly within education systems, academia, and the media, to foster a global citizenry that nurtures coexistence while respecting differences? Thank you.
You'd have to repeat that.
You'll have to repeat that for me. Can you do the 2 questions a little slower, please,
Yes,
and louder?
For sure. So my first question is, we were inspired by Said's notions of coexistence. Can this concept replace the idea of civilization, which in any case doomed to be frail? And my second question is, what systemic changes do we as human societies need to make, particularly within education systems, academia, and the media, to foster a global citizenry that nurtures coexistence while respecting differences?
Systemic changes, I think, was the second question. The second question is, what systemic changes do we need to encourage a global citizenry? Is that right?
In
Yes,
academia.
that nurtures coexistence while respecting difference.
Well, we need, look, even before we come round to systemic changes, we have to ask ourselves, is there a single government today that believes, for instance, that it's necessary to do something about climate change? They say they do. Now they'll even stop saying it, since Trump is not in favor of it, and all his groupies in Europe will go on to the same line. But it's very dangerous. And one reason, you just look what's happened in California, for God's sake. The people were sort of saying, my late friend and colleague on the New Left Review, Mike Davis, once said, let Malibu burn, meaning let their houses go. And he was sort of victimized and prevented from getting a job at university as a result of that. But what he was really saying is that you need planning in how you build, where you build, why you build. And that this planning, who is going to do it? And on climate change, it's impossible without a global plan. Impossible, in my opinion. So we have to argue for it, but I'm quite, depressed that we don't have any country in the Western world at any rate, and even in the Eastern world where they say, now we're progressing, you want to curb us by using this, which is, the Chinese are doing some things about it, it's absolutely true, but not enough. So on this we have to keep on agitating, and this system that we have at the moment, which is a system that completely defends every little bit of what capital does, is not going to do it. I mean, they had a chance, even within this system, after the 2008 Wall Street crash. There's a real possibility of a turn, of this is not the way we should run. This could wreck, this could divide, this could destroy our countries, and Obama didn't do it. I mean, senior Wall Street bankers said, we were called in to see the president at the White House, this is Obama, thinking that he's going to take us off, he's going to rap us on the knuckles, he's going to tell us you've been naughty and you can't do A, B, C, D, E, F ever again. Instead, he congratulates us and says, I know we've all had problems, but carry on, we must do our best. Nothing concrete came out of that. And that is what is basically so depressing about the politicians who run most of the Western world today.
Thank you. Can we go to this mic, please?
Thank you very much for your talk. My name is Stephanie Kavanaugh. I'm actually a historian working next door at the University of New Brunswick, teaching some of the things you talked about earlier in your talk. I was really heartened to hear that you ended your talk tonight with a message to the younger generations. We've had student protesters here in our joint campuses recently. I was wondering if you would be able to, what would your message be for university administrators facing student protests?
What would your message be for university administrators facing the student protests?
Well, the message would be for the people who take education seriously. And not all university administrators do take education seriously. They've been given these big jobs as a result of cronyism in many cases. I mean, the woman who headed the Columbia University in New York is a sort of total Blairite, you know, right-wing labor, does what she's told to do, no inherent, in my opinion, views that would advance or benefit education, which all students want, regardless of their political views. And I think they fell into this trap because they didn't have the guts to resist. And one reason they didn't have the guts to resist is because lots of pro-Israeli millionaires and billionaires threatened to withdraw their funds. That's one reason, it's not the only one. And that then raises the question, should education in a serious society which has some self-respect be dependent on private funding and private donations? Isn't this one thing that every single state should do for its citizens? And turn down the money which comes with conditions, as we've now seen. So I think students have to carry on resisting and saying we're not going to accept this and see how far they can go. You never know. I mean, we've won battles before, we can win some more again. And I think lots of people, lots of citizens of the United States who have been neutral on the war are quite shocked by the things that have happened. And it's this total failure of a decaying liberal administration, obviously in Canada, but also in the United States, the Democrats, which have created the space for a lurch to the right in American society. People saying, well, the liberals have failed us, they can't do anything, let's try the other one. They've tried Trump once, they're trying him again. It's a terrible indictment of the Democrats.
Thank you. We'll turn again to this microphone. Go ahead, please.
Hi, I'm Guy, I'm a fourth-year crim student. You kind of implied, because of the frailty of Western civilization, it seems like the future is socialism with Chinese characteristics. So basically, are we in for more authoritarianism either way, whatever happens, whether we actually fall to socialism with Chinese characteristics or we develop another form of fascism under Trump?
Did you hear that?
Armenian.
Spoke a bit fast there,
Is the future socialism with Chinese characteristics or fascism along the lines of that being encouraged by Trump? Did I get that?
Well, well, socialism with Chinese characteristics, I wouldn't call it that, what's happening in China. I wouldn't describe it like that. I would say it's capitalism with some socialist characteristics. But even in China, for instance, I'm very critical of their health system, where they've effectively introduced a private a mechanism where the well-off can get treatment. It's not that different. It's worse than in Canada, by the way. And they have to mend that. Xi has said that we have to make changes. How far he will, I don't know. But there's no doubt that there's been enormous progress in China from the 1980s onwards, which has transformed that country. It wouldn't have happened without the revolution, which created all these people who are going this far now. But it's amazing. I don't see anything like that happening in the Western world just yet. Also, Trump is a sort of maverick right-wing politician. To call him a fascist is to take him too seriously, because the fascists were serious people. They had ideologies, they wrote books, they were very serious fascist philosophers who one disagreed with and still does, but they were very bright people. And what we're seeing in the United States, I think, in the victory of Trump, is an act of despair by American citizens. They're not voting for fascism. To hand Trump the Senate, the House, the presidency, and he'd already got the judges swimming around in his copious pockets, that he's the most powerful president in recent years. And I don't want to give the credit for that to fascism, because he isn't that. And that the American political system itself is in deep crisis, and whether it can get itself out of that depends a lot on what the two political parties. I mean, if you look at it seriously, lots more continuities between Biden and Trump, and even Trump and Obama, than people want to give credit for, because Trump creates a spectacle around himself, which the others at least spared us that, though Biden came close to it. But so that's the situation. Especially in bad times, it's wrong to see we have to remain hopeful, don't get me wrong. But we should never pretend that things are better than they are, because that deceives us ourselves. We have to fight to make things better. No one else is going to do it for us. That's what you've got to understand.
We'll turn to this mic here and the inimitable Dr. Sean Narayan. I'd like to ask people asking questions at both mics, if you can please speak loudly into the mic and speak slowly enough so that I don't have to repeat your questions. Okay. Thank you. Dr. Narayan.
Yes. Hello. I'm Sean Narayan. I'm partner of political science here at St. Thomas. My question is, could you talk a little bit about how you think the Western world is handling the rise of China? Because you talked about the frailties of Western civilization. What's going to happen?
Look, let's first see what is happening in China, what China has become. In my opinion, China has become the industrial workshop of the world, what Britain was in the 19th and 20th centuries. The amazing rise of Chinese capitalism, albeit under the control of the Chinese Communist Party, has made it a very strong player. Its economy, despite those who want to disparage it, is, according to the terms used for these things in relation to other countries, doing extremely well. So the US has two choices: either to accept and coexist and compete, which is what you're all taught at schools. The system is about competition, competition, competition. Well, compete with China then. Don't slander it. Don't say it's doing things which it isn't. And don't threaten it militarily. The Chinese have only had one war in the last God knows how many years. How many has the United States fought since 9/11? So these are things to be borne. And the Chinese, mercifully, are not developing their military side. That's the trap the Russians fell into and stumbled. The Chinese are not doing that. So far they aren't. And so from their point of view, they're playing the game pretty well. They are popular in many parts of the world. When they go into African countries, they build social infrastructures. They do things which giving aid can't compete with, because they also build industry in these countries. So that is why the United States has got into a tizzy about all this. What if they overtake us? Well, quite honestly, if they overtake you, a lot of the world would sit up and clap its hands saying, thank God someone's done it, without, without fighting a war, without using nuclear weapons. Because if there's a war fought against China, whether the excuse is Taiwan or something else, well, it's not going to be restricted to that part of the world. The Chinese have been concentrating on building a self-defense military industry. They will defend their borders and the periphery of these borders, but they have also got the nuclear weaponry necessary to target the United States and Europe if they wish to. Or why provoke a war which could be a disastrous nuclear conflict? No one goes out thinking wars are going to develop into bigger conflicts, because they don't know, but they do, and they can develop in that fashion. You know, small things, or things that seem small, can trigger off a bigger development. So the choice facing the United States and its Western allies is, are we going to do a deal with China in which we don't threaten to sanction it, in which we don't interfere with its trade, in which we basically strike a deal with it or not? That's the question. It's not a problem for the Chinese. They'll defend themselves. It is a problem for the United States. It's as if they had learnt no lessons at all from history of how the First World War happened, of why millions died in the First World War. So let's hope that, I mean, this is not something actually which is against US or Western interests. I mean, it's basically, it's common sense. And a lot of American writers and philosophers and historians are actually saying this now and publishing books that are saying it is control yourselves. Don't go over the top as far as China is concerned. And here, if the Europeans had an ounce of independence, they should be doing this and saying, no, we won't go along with you, but they just follow the United States in whatever it does, as does Canada. And so that is not the act. I've always said that good friends should always tell the truth to other good friends, even if the friends don't like it. And this is how Europe and Canada should behave towards the United States. No, you're wrong. Okay, you can abuse us, call us what you like. We think you're wrong, and this is why the world would be a far better place if that happened.
Thank you. The person at this mic, you might want to pull that mic down towards yourself. There we go.
Hi, my name is Charlotte. I was born in the U.S., so I appreciate you bringing light and to the issues with our current president, Donald Trump, especially as a Mexican American. The issues of immigration is heavy on my heart right now. I have a lot of close friends that are first gen and are worried about their own nationality, even though they were born in the country. But I'm also half Ashkenazi, and so Israel and Palestine is also an issue heavy on my heart. And my question to you is, if Israel did not have, if the Jewish people did not have Israel, then where would they go?
What's your last bit, she said?
If the Jewish people did not have Israel, where would they go?
If Jewish people, well, I think it depends how they want to live. There are lots of people, of course, Jewish people, who have nowhere to go. I accept that. But then they have, from the very beginning, not wanted to make peace with their neighbors. They go into a land, they occupy it with the backing of Britain, and later the United States. And the obvious choice for, and some very intelligent Israeli politicians discuss this, shouldn't we be making friends with the Arabs? We live with them, in their midst. Or should we be constantly doing what the West wants us to do? Well, Israel was formed in 1948, and one of their leading Zionist historians had admitted that this was not a peaceful expulsion of the Palestinian people, that villages were emptied, women were raped, lots of cruelties happened, and they carry on because they want all that territory based on the Old Testament. I mean, Islam is constantly attacked for being too rigorous to the teachings of the Quran. But quite honestly, the Zionists are doing it at a much, much higher level. Amalek, wipe out your enemies, wipe out them all, exterminate them. So where should they go is they should, and the people who support them should. Again, like good friends say, you have to learn, since you've made a second state impossible for the Palestinians, you have got to learn to live in a single state with equal rights. And sooner or later, it seems very difficult now after the genocide, but sooner or later that will work out. There are many others who have dual nationality. You know, all the Brooklyn hardline Jews who came and settled on the occupied territories and are known now as the settlers, they can always go back to Brooklyn. And in fact, since this business began a year ago, lots of Jewish people are going away, finding places, going home. Many of them are settling in Germany. So, there are places to do, but the best way, as far as I'm concerned, would be to learn how to live in peace with your neighbors and not treat the neighbors as if they are second-class, inferior people. I mean, the number of times I've heard people in this war, mainly and only Jewish people, shouting at journalists who dared ask them, why do you think killing a Palestinian child is somehow different from killing a Jewish child? And they say, because we are superior to them. They are animals. Kill the Arabs has been a very common charge. over the last year. You can't live with people like that. Who would? I mean, you know, ultimately the United States had a civil war, one of whose aims was to end slavery. It needed a civil war to do that. I'm not saying the Israelis should fight with a civil war with each other, but they certainly should think about a long-term settlement which creates a democratic state in Israel and not an apartheid state. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people behind
I'm
you,
sorry,
and 8, 2 on the other side, and I'm getting a bit tired.
Okay. Thank you very much. So we'll go over to this microphone, please. And I'm afraid we are actually running out of time, so I think we might only be able to take 2 more questions because we do want to have the reception and to have the opportunity for people to get their books signed. So.
Hi, my name is Ariel Lincoln. I'm here from Fredericton High School with my world history class. And
Could you speak into the mic?
yeah, sorry. What are your thoughts about the effect of being able to watch the genocide in the palms of our hands because of the internet versus media coverage on wars before the internet?
What do you think about being able to watch the war in Gaza right in people's phones as opposed to media coverage on television, for example, during the war in Vietnam? Thank you.
It creates a huge difference, clearly. People who are watching it on their telephones every single day learn to ask questions, saying, why is this going on? And once you ask these questions, if you have any sense of objectivity, you have to read. And read books, read pamphlets, read even newspapers you don't agree with, to get it into your head that this is a debate now that didn't start in October 2023, but started in 1948. And how are we going to end this debate? And that's the thing. So obviously, seeing it on your phones or other television sets or Twitter even, things that you can't see anywhere else, has had a big impact. And in that sense, this technological revolution that has taken place, as I said earlier, has been very positive.
Okay, thank you. Final question of the night goes to one of my students. Make me proud, Alex.
Yes, well, that works. My name is Alexander Sonos. As Dr. Murphy mentioned, I'm a student of hers. And my question is, given the growing power disparity between the rich and the poor in America, and given how much of the current Trump administration are members of that rich elite, and given the dominant moral position in the United States is the Christian one, do you believe that there could be any future justifications for assertions of power or force over the American people by its government or over America's allies that would be similar to the feudal divine right of kings? Do you draw any similarities there or any relationship?
I don't think, honestly, that this is my view, that the Trump government, my main characterization of it is that it's quite a stupid government. I say this quite seriously because I can't think of a single person who Trump has put in his cabinet. Well, maybe there are one or two. I don't know. Who is capable of thinking strategically of what the United States needs. And this was never the case, either in the Republican Party or the Democrats some decades ago. They had people, You didn't have to agree with everything they said, but you knew that they were thinking. Now you don't get that feeling. You know, everything becomes a joke or an attack on someone, and that's the same. I mean, the way Biden behaved, he basically, in my opinion, won Trump that election. We should see it like that. Otherwise, you can't explain his victory. What did Biden do? A, he hid the fact of how seriously ill he was when the whole world saw it in press conferences. Why hide it, for God's sake? It's not your fault. These things happen. You're getting old. Insisting on staying in power rather than permitting a free convention at a later stage to elect a new candidate. I think it was Biden's behavior and then the imposition of Kamala Harris, who thought by calling Trump a fascist or making jokes about him was the way forward. And that clearly is not what the American citizenry wanted. There again, they had a choice to call an open Democratic convention and allow a debate to take place and choose a candidate who they thought would be able to defeat Trump. They were so cocky, so arrogant, that they thought they would get away with it. And so were most of their supporters elsewhere in the globe, thinking that's it. You know, you have the comic side of Labour politicians in Britain who thought the Democrats were going to win and said horrific things from their point of view, about Trump. Now they're apologizing. I'm not joking. They are actually standing up and apologizing. Oh, sorry, in the beginning of 2023, I said Trump was a complete so-and-so and would wreck the country. I'm sorry for saying that. I didn't mean it. This guy is going to be appointed Britain's new ambassador to the United States. This is the level of things in global politics, and we don't help the Democrats or anyone not to the left of the Republicans, even marginally, by covering up what they did and totally ignoring their role in power. 3 opinion polls have now said that it was Biden's unremitting, relentless support of Israel that drove many Democrats away from him, especially amongst the young. And that the cause, they're saying, if wherever the Democrat leaders go, tell them Gaza lost you that war because of the way you defended it and what you did and carried on arming the genocide. We should talk about that too. Otherwise, the thing becomes sort of unbalanced, really. Trump, 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 Trump. Trump is one guy who's almost bumped off, as he tells us many times. Who would have taken on that task then, had he been bumped off? So it's that style of thinking won't get us too far.